I'm really blessed to be able to speak with you all. I've been in this position for the past 7 months. And I've actually lived in this diocese twice before that, though, and I always feel like that makes me sound flaky. But I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and then after 5 years, my family moved to Quantico. And my dad was an instructor at the DEA Academy there, and we were parishioners at St. William of York. And then we moved to Raleigh, where we lived most of our life since then. My folks are still there. And then after college, I came and I worked in D.C. for a while, and that's where I met my wife, and we were married at St. Andrews in Clifton, and I was a parishioner at St. James, so we have lots of good history here, so it was very easy to come back, to come home, and just see so many of our friends still here, and it's really an honor to be able to get to meet a lot of you today, and I look forward to speaking with you throughout the rest of the conference. So it was actually after I left Virginia the first time, and before I came back, that a lot of my testimony, at least the part I'll share today, takes place. In high school, life was very good. I had a good life. I'd been raised by very devout Catholic parents. I had a job as a teenager as a lifeguard, and my grades were decent, and went to a good Catholic school. I'd really very little to complain about, and obviously being raised in the faith, those of you who were know how enriching that is as you grow up, especially as you're a young man, discovering your manhood, your masculinity, and who you are. One of the something I kind of identified with was football. I had played football in high school, and I was being recruited for Division I AA or maybe II school, and was really passionate about that sport. And I was getting ready for the physical. Every year you'd have to do a physical with the doctor, and just to kind of show that you're in generally good health. But I had gone to the doctor about 6 months before I had to do this and expressed an issue, and the doctor said, I think it's fine. It's probably this, maybe that. But he kind of blew it off, and I said, okay, he's the doctor, he knows. So when I went to get the physical 6 months later and found out, or realized, this hasn't gone away, I should bring this up again. The doctor, again, was kind of cavalier about it, but I said, I've still got an enlargement in one of my testicles, and it just doesn't seem to be going away. He goes, well, maybe it's a water buildup or something called a varicocele. He said, maybe it's something like that. I said, all right, but it's nerve-wracking, and of course, being a 16-year-old kid with something like that, you're like, I don't want to tell anybody, so if I'm telling my doctor, I'm concerned. He said, well, I can send you to a urologist if you would like, and they can kind of examine that and check it out. I said, okay, that sounds reasonable. So not long after that at all, my dad and I went to the urologist and met the guy who's a nice doctor, gave me kind of a physical exam, and then his personality kind of shifted a little bit, and he said, hold on one sec. So he leaves the room, and he comes back about 10 or 15 minutes later, and he said, so here's the deal. I'd like you to go get an ultrasound done and get this examined. I'm like, okay. And he said, and I'd like you to go to the hospital. Western Wake was the hospital nearby. He said, I'd like you to go there, and actually I want you to go right now. The doctor will wait for you there. So 2 things concerned me. 1, doctors never wait for you. So there was an urgency that I wasn't excited about. And 2 was, I didn't know what an ultrasound was. I just knew that pregnant women got them. And I thought, oh boy, I'm in a lot of trouble. I was like, this is worse than I thought. So my dad and I drive over to the hospital, and just like he said, the nurses were waiting there, and the nurse did the ultrasound, and I asked her questions, and like always, they say, we don't know, the radiologist will know. And she pointed to a phone in the room and said, the radiologist is going to call the results in to your urologist, and he's going to call you on that phone. So wait until you hear that phone ring, then pick it up. I said, okay. Again, the urgency of that felt kind of pressing. So eventually the phone rings, but it took a while. And my dad and I had been sitting there. My dad and I, he's my best friend. He was the best man at my wedding because I couldn't find a better man. And we were sitting there. We always have something to say. We had nothing to say. It was quiet for about 20 minutes or so. Finally, the phone rings, it picks up, and every word he shared was just kind of one word, yeses, nos, okay, when. So he didn't really tip his hand as to what's going on. And then he hangs up the phone and says, so they think it's cancer, and they want to do surgery. Again, 16-year-old kid, enlarged testicle, doesn't want to have surgery. No, not excited about that. And I said, okay, when do they want to do surgery? Tomorrow morning. Again, this urgency. It's like when I went to that physical to get ready for football season, so all of a sudden I'm seeing my football career flash before my eyes and saying, could this be over? Could all this be it? And the unknown is so horrifying. So we drive home, and we had family visiting from out of town. I was like, I'm not interested in hanging out with family right now. So I grabbed my lifeguard shorts and whistle and took off and was going to go work a shift at the pool. And I was sitting at a stoplight in my 1978 Pontiac Phoenix, and I'd never experienced what I'm about to describe to you. I had heard of it, but I'd never experienced it. It was bursting into tears. And usually you feel it welling up, and you kind of fight it back. Oh, no, I'm not going to let it go. You don't want to cry. You can maybe sometimes push it off, or you at least know it's coming. I went from 0 to 100 in like a tenth of a second, just tears flooding down my face. And I finally cleared the tears away and realized the light's green. And I said, well, I can't go work a shift at the pool. I don't think parents would be too confident in their lifeguard if he's sobbing like a baby from a lifeguard stand. So I said, okay, time to go home. So I took a U-turn and went home. The next morning when we went to the hospital for surgery, I was walking in, and I remember this feeling. I walked through the doors. You know how there's the wind that kind of sweeps down, it keeps the bugs out. And I remember I was in a T-shirt and gym shorts. I remember feeling it kind of whoosh by my legs and just kind of looking down. And I had been working out like a madman. I had been lifting weights all summer. I had been running constantly. I was in the best shape I had ever been, and probably even to this day. And thinking of that irony or the juxtaposition of being so physically fit and yet so unhealthy. Usually we think of them going together, but I was not. I was clearly not healthy, at least to a certain degree, and we didn't know what was coming next. Hopefully this was it, but we didn't know. So I remember thinking that. So I have this surgery, and as I'm pulling out of the anesthetic fog, as I call it, and I got all too familiar with that feeling over time, I looked at the doctor, and he was sitting right there, and I said, so doc, how'd it go? And he said, well, the surgery was successful. And then the next thing he said haunted me for years because it was so true. And usually doctors don't editorialize. They just give you kind of facts of the matter. He said, but we found cancer trailing up into your abdomen, and it's going to be a long fight. Wow. So he didn't pull any punches. He told me as it was. So that was obviously very scary, young man, and thinking, wow, so this is really all going to be it. Like everything that I know, everything that I attach myself to, athleticism, sports, this might all be gone. And we move on, and we had heard that being in North Carolina, especially in the Triangle, we were very lucky. UNC hospital systems and the Duke hospital system are two of the best in the world, and they're 25 minutes apart from each other, so we were very lucky. And being 16, I was recommended to go to UNC because they had a great kind of juvenile ontological unit and this great board that would review everything. So we went and met with them. They came up with this plan, and they said, so for what you have, and I had cancer basically throughout my abdomen with a softball-sized tumor behind my kidneys. They said, I had been experiencing back pain that summer, and I thought it was just because I was lifting a lot of weight and squatting and deadlifts and all that kind of stuff. I thought it was just, from overworking it. So they came up with this plan. They said 9 months of chemo, maybe more, and then at least 1 or 2 surgeries. That's what their thinking was. And my heart was broken. I was like, everything I'd worked for, everything I'd ever wanted is going to go away. There's no way I can get ready for another season if I'm doing a year's worth of treatment. So we said, let's go to Duke and just get a second opinion. I mean, there was this phenomenal board of doctors that had come up with this plan, so we were confident in it. We were like, let's run down the road. And coincidentally, the doctor at Duke is world-renowned for testis cancer. He's one of the best. If you are practicing that medicine today, you probably studied something he wrote, because he really pioneered the field in a lot of ways. But he mostly deals with adults. So we went to him, Dr. Philip Walther. He's a phenomenal doctor, and he looked at the plan, and we explained to him what UNC was going to do, and he looks at it and he goes, again, we're here for a second opinion, and he goes, dumb, dumb, dumb. Doc, I have enough. I just got out of a surgery, for testis cancer. Could you lighten that a little bit? His marketing skills weren't too good. So I said, all right, what's going on? He said, they're treating you like a child. He goes, you're what, 6'1", 205 pounds? He goes, you're an adult. You don't need to be doing that. He goes, we can compress that 9 months of chemo into 3 months, and then 1 or 2 surgeries after that. And I'm thinking, I like what I'm hearing, because I'm hearing a shorter time frame. I would find out what 9 months of chemo in 3 months would really feel like. But my dad, again, his specialty with law enforcement was raids and entries. He looked like Lou Ferrigno sitting there next to me. And he said, but this chemo regimen would kill your dad. He goes, so it's going to be intense. You need to know that going in. But all I heard was 3 months. So I'm thinking, okay, carry the one, I could get back for the next season maybe. So we get into the hallway. My parents and I were like cross-eyed with confusion. What do we do? What do we do? And one thing that we had asked the doctor was, well, what about the fact that there's this board at UNC that would review it? And he said, when you know what you're doing, you don't need a board. Oh, boy. I love Dr. Walter, but I was like, either he's the most arrogant human being to ever walk the face of the earth, or he's got reason for that confidence. And I was like, if he's at Duke University and he's that confident or arrogant, he might have a reason to be. They wouldn't keep him around if he was that tough. So we talked about it, and I said, I really feel like Dr. Walter's the guy. So we went with Duke, and that's where I did all of my treatments. So we started chemo very quickly thereafter. And most people, when they do chemotherapy, they'll do a few hours a day every week or something like that, or a day of chemo, then they're off for a week. The way they did it was 6 days of chemo, 12-hour drips, and then I would take 3 weeks off and then come back and do the next one. So it was 3 like that. It was brutal, really, really brutal. The best way I can describe the feeling of chemotherapy is, imagine you take like every household cleaner you can find, dump it all into a bucket and replace your blood with that cleaner. It's just this horrible, toxic feeling the whole time. The second it starts, you know something's going in you that's just not meant to be. And it's a poison. It's a poison that kills all kinds of cells. It kills cancer cells, but it kills your hair follicle cells. It kills your immune system. It kills all kinds of stuff. That's why it's so brutal. It can target to some degree, but it's really a shotgun approach. It's going to catch a lot of other things along the way. So I start chemotherapy, and within just a few hours, I start throwing up, just getting violently nauseous. And then the next day, I'm throwing up bile. And then by day 3, it's blood. And I did that for 6 days. And I didn't eat. In fact, if I heard the food cart coming down the hall, I threw up. The thought of food, let alone the smell or the taste, it wasn't going to happen. Well, I lost 25 pounds in 6 days. I put on as much weight as I could coming into the second round, lost another 25 pounds, and then, rinse and repeat, did that a third time. And there was always this question of whether or not I need 4 rounds of chemo, but luckily 3 of that was enough, and that's about all I could take. But I went from 205 pounds of mostly muscle to 160 pounds of just frail old man. That's what I looked like. I was just in really, really bad shape. So I learned what 9 months of chemo looks like in 3 months, and I don't think they do it anymore. And if you have the chance, if you get cancer and you have a chance to spread it out, do it. But you do what you got to do to get healthy at the same time. And throughout chemo, it was so agonizing and so brutal, I envisioned it as the devil. I said, the devil's trying to break me. So by envisioning the tumor as the devil, I was able to drive through a little bit, because you have to dig deep to get through something like that. It's so intense that it would be very easy to get disillusioned. It would be very easy to get really negative or really pessimistic. So I had to find a way, and that was my way, I envisioned it as the devil. And I had so many people praying for me. I got prayer cards from all over the world, folks that would, share my name on different prayer lists. They'd tell my story, and I was getting stuff from everywhere. People were sending me books. I got more copies of Lance Armstrong's book that I know what to do with. I probably got a case of them somewhere if anyone would like one. But people were sending so many, prayer guides and resources, and just letting me know that they were praying for me. And I really felt it too. I really felt in that time all those prayers coming my way, because there was something unique about the way I was able to handle it that was no credit to me. And I feel that people would say, I don't know how you do this. I don't know how you go through something like that. I was like, well, I didn't choose it. This isn't like a journey I've selected. I've got to go through this. But there is something to the idea, and I've heard this quote a long time ago, is God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. This is true for a circumstance like what I was going through, but it's also true for vocations. I look at the life of priests. Being in my position, I have the blessing of seeing the work of priests, the day-to-day work that they have to do for us. And it's so much more than what we see on Sundays or when we go to confession. That's like a fraction of what they have to do on a daily basis. How do they do that? How do you manage that schedule? Manage all these people needing things from you? It's grace of the vocation. God gives the grace. He qualifies the individual through his love and his grace. Marriage. For those in this room that work, you're constantly divided between work and home. That's a tough thing. You're constantly being pulled by one from the other. How do we do that? I think it's grace. My wife is at home with 3 little kids right now. How does she do that day after day after day, dealing with all these little things that are so unfulfilling in many circumstances and in many ways? How do they do it? I think they're given the grace they need to fulfill the vocation. In circumstances, we have that same opportunity in different struggles. You might be in a job you hate, but there's something in that. There's some grace that you can draw from that can really enrich your soul. There may be some other circumstance. You're dealing with issues with family. Maybe someone's passed away and there's like an estate dispute. Whatever it is, there is a grace and an opportunity, but you do have to sometimes look for it. It's not always going to be apparent. So I went through this experience, and one of the hardest realities of the consequence of this chemo was I was told you wouldn't be able to have kids. And it was a definite. There wasn't a doctor, not a resident, that would ever have disputed that fact. And that wore on me for so long. And when I met my wife, I told her, this is not going to be a reality of ours, unfortunately. And she was okay with that. We would adopt. I'd like to introduce you at some point to Liam, Angelina, and Anna Kate, our 4-year-old, 3-year-old, and 1-year-old, that God has blessed us with, despite everything that we've seen here. All of the chemo, all of the testimony, that through that God was able to provide these enormous blessings to us. So when you're going through a struggle and you're told some facts, some definitive, sometimes there's a lining in there where God can really work and do something amazing. So my faith had carried me through this experience. I was so blessed. I think it was the enrichment of prayers, but I had been raised with faith. I had invested in faith. I went to a Catholic school where prayer and the Mass and the sacraments were a deep part of our life. But after cancer, I got a little cocky about my faith. And I felt a little bit like I was a mountain climber, where I'd been climbing this mountain, my whole life. And I got to a point where I was like, I'm going to hang out here for a while. And I got fat and lazy. And then when you got to climb the mountain again, you're not ready for it. What got you there, got you to that point, you stop doing. It's like any training regimen. Well, you got to keep doing that to keep progressing. Or you got to do more even. And I kind of stopped. I saw faith as like a fact of the matter, rather than as like this organism that's always growing or shrinking. You're never really stagnant in faith. You might feel stagnant in faith, but if you're investing and you're pushing through that and continuing your prayer life, your exposure to the sacraments, maybe having a spiritual director, then you're actually growing. You just don't see it. You just don't know that it's growing. But if you're not investing in it, I guarantee you which direction it's going, and it's shrinking, and it's moving backwards. You're that mountain climber that's kind of gotten stagnant and decided to get fat and lazy on the middle of the mountain. So I was still intellectually able to defend the faith. In fact, in college especially, I was a constant apologist for the faith. But there was something inside that wasn't quite there. There was this relationship with God that really wasn't being fed, at least on my side. And that hurt me later. Because when I was in college, the football thing never happened. It never worked out. Coaches are not interested in a guy that's survived cancer and gone through everything that I went through. I wasn't a real attractive candidate at that point. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll go to West Point or join the Army. And then I was medically disqualified. So I had these kind of other setbacks of things that I wanted to do. Ended up going to college. And I was a college cheerleader at East Carolina University. And I was getting ready for practice one day, and I threw on my T-shirt. And when I was putting on my gym shorts, I felt this lump. And I just kind of like slowly closed my eyes and looked down. And right on my hip, right above my waistline, was like an egg-sized lump that I hadn't seen before. And I felt it for a second, and I said, I know what this is. And I was right. They did a quick biopsy, and it was cancer, but it was not related to the original cancer. This one's what's called a desmoid tumor. It's a sarcoma. And I went back to Duke, where they had taken such good care of me before, and they came up with a plan. But luckily, this one would not require chemotherapy. It would not require all that intensive treatment, but it would require 2 major surgeries. One to remove the tumor, but in order to get what they call negative margins, which means they basically take a little extra to make sure they get all the cancer, they had to reconstruct my hip. So they took tissue and muscles from throughout my leg to reinforce my hip to give it the strength that it needed. So between my sternum and my knee, I've got 4 feet, 3.5 inches of scar on my body. And the hip surgery was very intensive. It was very painful. I had 10 days in the hospital, and then I had to basically train my leg to walk without the muscles and the tendons and ligaments that they used in the hip. It's stunning what you can still do, though. I'd done martial arts throughout my life, and I competed in judo after that, which requires a lot of like hip motion and leg strength and those kinds of things. It's a medical miracle, quite frankly, what they're able to do, and this was a little while back. Faith-wise, though, something was very different. Because I had gotten lazy in my faith, because I had kind of gone stagnant and just let it be intellectual, my faith didn't carry me through this time. I was really, really angry at God. I had said, I did this. I've been there. I've got the t-shirt. Why am I going back? Why do I have to do this again? Why is my life uprooted like this all over again? And then, of course, fears of, well, what if I get it a third time? What if I don't survive the next time? All that stuff starts really plaguing me. And I said, I did this with you, and I got cancer again. So let me try it without you and see how that goes. And I lived about a year kind of like intensely rejecting God from my life and just living however I wanted to, and fell to a lot of the things you would expect a young man to fall to in that time. And it was a long year. And I remember one point my mom asked me if I was still praying, because she could, I think, tell that something wasn't right. And I looked at her with like disgust, like, how stupid do you think I am? After everything I went through, I gave talks and testimonies kind of like this about my faith, about how it had carried me through this horrible experience. And he gave it to me again? He would do that to me? Well, if he does this to his friends, I'd hate to think of what happens to his enemies. I was so hurt. I was so hurt by that. So no, I wasn't praying. No, I wasn't. I was going to Mass, though, because I didn't want my sister to know what was going on. She went to the same college, so I was like, all right, I'll keep up appearances and make sure she's still getting to church. But inside, there was really nothing going on there. So after a year, I remember I was laying in my dorm room, looking up at the ceiling, just living in this misery I had built for myself, all the depression and all those kinds of things. And I said to myself, well, I'm fairly analytical, and I said, well, how's this working out for you? And it wasn't, and it was clear. And it had been a long time coming that I'd asked that of myself. And I prayed for the first time I had prayed in a long time. And this was the prayer. God, please don't let me die tonight, because I'm going to hell if I do. And it wasn't that God didn't want me, it's that I didn't want him. And I was worried he was going to give me what I was asking for. I'd been pushing myself away so aggressively. I said, well, isn't that the logical end of actively rejecting what he so badly wants for me? It was scary. It was a scary reality. So before that second cancer, when I had stopped investing in my faith, it was mostly intellectual. I remember reading from James chapter 2, verse 19, and I think it in some ways defines the faith struggle I was going through. It says, you believe that God is one, you do well. And what that means is, you believe in the truth of God. He's the Lord of Lords, the King of Kings. These facts about him. It's not about the relationship side, but it's just the raw truths of who God is. You believe that God is one, you do well. Even the demons believe and shudder. Ooh, that is haunting, isn't it? That even the demons believe in God to a certain extent. Obviously, there's no relationship there. They haven't internalized the faith, but they know he's one. They know the victory of Calvary. They know the truth of the Eucharist. They know the power of confession and forgiveness and mercy. They know that, maybe better than we do. So if even the demons believe, then what does it take for us to really believe? What do we really mean when we say belief? We're not talking about what the demons believe. We're not talking about that kind of belief. We're talking about something else. So what is that? I think it's defined in Matthew. Jesus is asked why he speaks to the crowd in parables. And it's interesting what he says here. Jesus says, they look, but they do not see, and hear, but do not listen or understand. He then reaches back into Isaiah's prophecy, which he says is going to be fulfilled. You shall indeed hear, but not understand. You shall indeed look, but never see. Gross is the heart of this people. They will hardly hear with their ears. They have closed their eyes, lest they see with their eyes and hear with the ears and understand with the heart and be converted, and I heal them. My problem was that I had not understood with the heart. Intellectually, I was defending the faith. I understood it to a certain degree, and I let that become my faith life. I let the facts of the matter become my faith life. But look at the formula here. Understand with the heart and be converted, and I heal them. My spiritual suffering was considerably worse than my physical suffering. Considerably worse. But if I understand with the heart and experience that conversion of faith, then there's healing. That internalizing, going beyond the facts of the matter, beyond the intellectual, is what, and really entering into a relationship with God, that's what feeds the soul. That's where the conversion happens. That's where the healing happens. That's where God's mercy really penetrates through our weakness. It penetrates through right there. And after my second battle with cancer, and actually before that too, I had the opportunity to counsel a lot of cancer patients. Duke has a program where I was able to go back and talk to men who were experiencing a similar cancer to what I had experienced. And it was fascinating, and it was a really good learning experience for me because I realized there is no silver bullet. When they asked the tough questions, why in the world is this happening to me? I met men that knew they were going to die. I met a child one time who had leukemia and a heart disease, and they didn't know which one was going to kill that child first. What's strange is the kids don't ask a lot of those questions. It's the adults that do. The kids have this strange, like sixth sense almost about them, where they see the big picture better than we do. I don't have an answer for you as to why that is, but it's just an observation. But a lot of the men I would talk to would struggle with why. Why is this happening to me? Some had it multiple times. Why? Why twice? Why do I have to go through treatment this intense? Why I have to be so sick? Why do I have to lose my job because of this? It puts enormous strain on everything, the whys. And there wasn't a perfect answer, but I do know this. The reason I was effective with them is because when they looked in my eyes, they knew if I understood with the heart. They knew if I really believed it or if I had just come up with a good line for them. And isn't this the real power of evangelization when we talk about sharing our faith? It's not about having the perfect answer. That's part of it. We're intellectual beings, but we're also spiritual beings. We're also emotional beings. And if your answer doesn't reflect that too, it's not going to do you much good. That witness is going to be what's effective with your children. It's going to be effective with your spouse, your friends, family. Anybody that you want to believe in the faith, you have to go beyond the understanding with just the mind, just the intellectual, what the demons believe, to something much deeper, where you understand with the heart and you're converted and healed. The healing those cancer patients saw in me came from walking that line. And when I didn't, it fell apart. And I was useless to them for that time. I had nothing really to offer. And I could tell something was not clicking. When I would meet with them and talk to them, I could tell, man, they're not buying it. It's because I didn't really have it. I didn't really have it. The most attractive quality in any person is confidence. This is true in dating. This is true in friendships. This is true in leadership in in an organization or a business. Confidence. But confidence, I think, comes from an intellectual knowledge that is rooted in that understanding of the heart and genuine conversion. People that are trying to convince you, even if they're trying to convince you to buy a product, you kind of know if they really like the product by the way they respond, right? You can tell if it's just salesy or if they really believe what they're saying. How much truer is that with the faith? How much truer is that when we're talking about salvation? How much truer is it then? So the answers to the questions aren't sufficient. It takes something a little bit more. And sometimes I would feel, especially as I reverted back, so after that experience in my dorm room where I said that prayer for the first time, that was the beginning of a long process back to faith. It was not instant. Some people talk about like a conversion experience, and it's one day they're wretched, the next day, bang, they're on. They're a devout Catholic, and it just was never better since then, and they move on. For me, I'm not that smart. It takes me a little longer to catch on. So it was a long process for me. And it felt overwhelming at times. It felt like it was all on me. I had to do all of these things. And one of the greatest struggles was allowing room for grace, allowing room for God to work, for him to really love me when I was trying to, again, just go back to the intellectual. I got to know more. Instead of just sitting in prayer and quiet, I have to know, well, how do I need to pray? Researching all these things. Don't overcomplicate it, especially early on, especially if you're struggling in faith. Just be quiet. Let God do some of that work. I read the book The Hobbit from J.R.R. Tolkien, and it's a wonderful book. I love the book. It is a long book, but it's worth reading. But there's a point at the end of the book where Bilbo Baggins, who's the main character of the book, is a new person. And his friends don't even really recognize him. It's like Father Mike was saying earlier about being different, being unique. You're going to stand out. You're going to look different. He did. He went through this profound experience of this whole book where he had survived near-death experiences with almost killed by trolls and spiders and goblins, and he had fought bitter cold. He was almost drowned. Just countless experiences of near death. That suffering, though, is what really transformed him. That's what really converted him into something else. And by the end, he was so transformed, he looked at adversity differently. And his friends and companions saw him as a different person. They treated him differently. They understood he was not the same person. And in the last page of the book, Gandalf, who is a good friend of Bilbo's, is discussing the prophecies that predicted the success of their journey, kind of like Isaiah predicted what Jesus was saying, as I mentioned earlier, about conversion of the heart, seeing with the eyes and hearing with the ears. Again, Bilbo asks, then the prophecies of the old songs have turned out to be true? Gandalf replies, of course, and why should they not prove true? Surely you don't disbelieve the prophecies because you had a hand in bringing them about yourself. You don't really suppose, do you, that all your adventures and escapes were managed by mere luck, just for your sole benefit? You're a very fine person, Mr. Baggins, and I'm very fond of you, but you are only quite a little fellow in this wide world after all. And Bilbo responds, thank goodness. I encourage you to find your thank goodness moment where in your journey of faith, as you're working to understand with the heart, did you find that thank goodness moment where you realize it's just not all on you? Yes, know the faith better. I'm not telling you don't have an intellectual standing of the faith, but don't let that supersede or create kind of a veneer over a gap in the relationship you have with God. Because those are the roots. That's the real foundation of the structure that you build your faith on. And if you don't, and the storms, whether they be suffering or anything else, just doubt maybe, it'll break that structure apart in no time. And it's in that suffering that you really know where your faith is. And that's an opportunity in suffering. I do not regret for a moment the things that I've gone through, as bad as they were, as brutal as they were, and the things that they took away from me. I was never going to gain from these other things what I gained in learning more about my faith and trying to find a way to understand with the heart. How much more will that benefit me in the long run than the things I lost in suffering? The devil wants to use that suffering to bring you down. But what's amazing is how God can use that suffering and turn it on its head and use it for your salvation. It's an amazing thing. St. Jose Maria Escrivá, who was mentioned earlier, reacted to suffering by calling it the Christian Revolution. St. Escrivá said, the great Christian revolution has been to convert pain into fruitful suffering and to turn a bad thing into something good. We have deprived the devil of this weapon, and with it, we conquer eternity. It's one of the most beautiful quotes I've ever read, especially as it relates to suffering. To convert pain, which we see as a pure negative. The beauty of God is he turns it into fruitful suffering. He can create something out of that mess. And it's a weapon. We've deprived the devil of this weapon, and with it we can conquer eternity. Everyone suffers. Everyone goes through something. It's not typically cancer. Sometimes it is. Maybe it's your marriage. Maybe your kids are acting in ways that you just wish they wouldn't, and it's painful. It's painful to see. Maybe you're experiencing an addiction of some sort, some compulsive behavior that you just wish you wouldn't do anymore. But it's just so hard. God wants to deprive the devil of that weapon, and with it, he wants to conquer eternity. Not just do some good, conquer eternity with it. Gentlemen, that is the opportunity we have in suffering. Whatever your suffering is, rip that sword out of the devil's hand, and with it we'll conquer eternity. Thank you so much. God bless you.